I moved into Meadowbrook Estates thinking I'd found paradise. The neighborhood was pristine, with manicured lawns and tree-lined streets that looked like something out of a magazine. Sure, there was an HOA, but the fees were reasonable and the rules seemed sensible enough. What I didn't know was that Karen Whitmore, our HOA president, was about to turn my peaceful suburban dream into a full-time job of defensive maneuvering. Karen was one of those people who seemed to have been born clutching a rulebook. She was in her late 50s, always dressed in what I called suburban battle armor, which consisted of pressed khakis, sensible flats, and pastel cardigans that somehow made her look more intimidating rather than less. She wore her HOA president badge the way a general wears their stars, and she patrolled the neighborhood in her white SUV like it was her personal kingdom. I first met Karen 3 days after moving in. I was still unpacking boxes when my doorbell rang. There she stood, clipboard in hand, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Welcome to Meadowbrook Estates. I wanted to personally deliver your welcome packet and go over a few important rules." The few rules turned into a 45-minute lecture about garbage placement, approved paint colors, and the absolute prohibition of any lawn decorations except during designated holiday windows. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this tale of suburban justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. For the first few months, I kept my head down and followed every rule to the letter. My garbage cans were stored out of sight. My lawn was maintained to country club standards. I didn't dare hang a wreath on my door outside the approved December 1st through January 15th window. But Karen had a special talent for finding problems where none existed. She cited me for having my car parked too close to the street, which meant my rear bumper was 3 inches past an imaginary line she'd decided existed. She left a violation notice because my mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. Never mind that it was the exact same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. The real trouble started when I decided to install solar panels. I'd done my research thoroughly. Solar panels were explicitly allowed under state law, which superseded HOA regulations. I'd even chosen a sleek, low-profile design that would be barely visible from the street. I submitted my application to the Architectural Review Committee with all the required documentation, legal precedents, and professional installation plans. Karen denied it within 24 hours. Her reason? Solar panels are not consistent with the aesthetic vision of Meadowbrook Estates. I politely replied via email, attaching the relevant state statutes that prohibited HOAs from denying solar installations. She responded with a new rule she claimed had just been discovered in the original bylaws requiring a $7,500 architectural review fee for any solar installation. This fee existed nowhere in any official documentation, but Karen insisted it was legitimate. I attended the next HOA board meeting to contest this. The board consisted of Karen and 4 other homeowners who seemed primarily interested in keeping their heads down and not becoming Karen's next target. I presented my case calmly and thoroughly, with printed copies of the relevant laws for each board member. Karen listened with her arms crossed, that fake smile plastered on her face. When I finished, she said, "Thank you for your input, but the board has already made its decision. The fee stands." She moved to adjourn the meeting before anyone else could speak. That's when I started digging into Karen's activities as HOA president. I'm an attorney specializing in corporate law, though I'd been semi-retired and consulting from home, which is why I'd moved to the suburbs in the first place. I had time, resources, and a very particular set of skills that Karen was about to become intimately familiar with. I requested copies of all HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and contracts for the past 5 years. As a homeowner, I had every legal right to these documents, though Karen tried to delay, claiming they needed to be prepared first. When I finally received the records after threatening legal action, I spent a weekend going through everything with a forensic accountant's attention to detail. That's when I found it. 6 months earlier, Karen had proposed bringing on a property management company called Premier Estate Services to handle the day-to-day operations of our HOA. The motion had been tabled after other board members questioned why we needed to spend $30,000 a year for services that volunteers were currently handling adequately. But the interesting part was buried in Karen's correspondence files. There were emails between Karen and a representative from Premier Estate Services that she'd apparently forgotten to delete from the shared HOA server. These emails discussed a consulting arrangement, where Karen would receive monthly payments of $1,000 once Premier Estate Services secured the contract with Meadowbrook Estates. They'd even discussed how to structure it to look legitimate, suggesting Karen could be paid as an HOA liaison coordinator, a position that didn't exist and would have no actual duties. This was a bribe, plain and simple. Karen was attempting to steer a lucrative contract to a company in exchange for personal payments, using HOA funds that came from homeowner dues. It was a breach of her fiduciary duty, likely illegal, and definitely grounds for removal from the board. But I didn't want to just remove Karen. I wanted her to understand exactly what she'd done and watch her carefully constructed kingdom crumble around her. I made copies of everything, then reached out quietly to the other 4 board members individually. I met with them in person, away from Karen's watchful eyes. I showed them the evidence, explained the legal implications, and outlined what could happen to the HOA and potentially to them if this went forward and was later discovered by authorities. To their credit, once they saw the proof, they were horrified. None of them had realized what Karen was attempting. They'd simply thought she was being her usual pushy self about this management company proposal. "We need to handle this carefully," said Marcus, a retired teacher who served as the board's treasurer. "If we confront her directly, she'll just deny everything and try to turn it back on us." We spent the next 2 weeks coordinating our approach. I drafted a formal complaint, documented everything meticulously, and prepared a presentation for an emergency board meeting. Meanwhile, I also quietly contacted the state's HOA regulatory board and the local district attorney's office to make them aware of the situation. I wasn't filing charges yet, but I wanted the authorities to have a heads up about what was coming. I also did something else. I reached out to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, all 63 families, and invited them to an informational meeting at the community center. I didn't tell them what it was about, just that it concerned important HOA business, and their attendance was strongly encouraged. Karen, of course, heard about this meeting. She called me furious. "You can't just call meetings without board approval. This is a violation of HOA procedures." "It's not an HOA meeting, Karen," I replied calmly. "It's a gathering of concerned homeowners. We're well within our rights to assemble and discuss community issues. You're welcome to attend, of course." She sputtered something about this being insubordination and hung up. I knew she'd be there. Karen couldn't resist an opportunity to assert her authority, and she'd assumed she could control the narrative. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. I'd never seen this many neighbors in one place. Karen arrived early, positioning herself at the front of the room like she was chairing the meeting. She had her clipboard, naturally, and she'd even brought a gavel. When the scheduled start time arrived, I walked to the front with a projector and my laptop. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know many of you are busy, so I'll get right to the point. I've discovered evidence that our HOA president has been engaged in conduct that violates her fiduciary duty to this community, and potentially violates state law." The room went silent. Karen's face turned red. "This is slander. I will not sit here and listen to." "Please hold your comments until I've finished presenting the evidence, Karen," I said, my voice level and professional. "Everything I'm about to show you is documented and verifiable." I clicked to the first slide, which showed an email from Premier Estate Services to Karen with the subject line, "Our arrangement." I watched the color drain from Karen's face as I walked everyone through the paper trail. The proposed contract with Premier Estate Services. The unusual push Karen had made to approve it despite questions from other board members. The emails discussing monthly payments to Karen. The proposed fake position that would funnel HOA money to her personally. I presented it all methodically, without editorial comment. I let the facts speak for themselves. When I finished, I opened the floor to questions. The room erupted. Homeowners who'd been silently enduring Karen's petty tyranny for years suddenly found their voices. They asked about other contracts she'd approved, other decisions she'd made. Several people mentioned suspicious expenses they noticed in the financial reports. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming the emails were taken out of context, that she'd been exploring options to improve the community, that this was all a misunderstanding driven by my vendetta against her. But no one was buying it. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Then Marcus stood up. As the board treasurer, his voice carried weight. Karen, I've reviewed these documents thoroughly. What's shown here represents a clear conflict of interest and an attempt to personally benefit from your position. The board has already met and voted. We're calling for your immediate resignation as president, and we'll be holding a special election for your replacement. Karen's eyes went wild. You can't do this. I've dedicated years to this community. I've maintained property values. I've enforced the rules that keep this neighborhood prestigious. You've also harassed homeowners with petty violations, made up rules that don't exist, and apparently tried to enrich yourself with our dues money, called out someone from the back. Others voiced their agreement. I could see Karen's world collapsing in real time. But I wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone. I've been in contact with the state HOA regulatory board and the district attorney's office. They're both very interested in these documents. Karen, you should know that accepting payment, or anything of value in exchange for steering a contract, is considered a bribe under state law. Even if the contract never went through, the attempt itself is prosecutable. That's when true panic set in. Karen's face went from red to white to a grayish shade I'd never seen on a living person. I never actually accepted any money, she stammered. It was just discussions, exploratory conversations about possibilities. Actually, I said, clicking to another slide, according to these bank records I subpoenaed through a preliminary legal inquiry, Premier Estate Services made a $1,500 payment to your personal account 3 weeks ago. It's listed as a consulting fee. Would you like to explain what consulting services you provided to a company that doesn't currently have a contract with our HOA? I hadn't actually subpoenaed anything yet. I'd simply done some creative public record searching and found a financial disclosure that Premier Estate Services had filed which listed the payment. But Karen didn't need to know the exact details of how I'd obtained the information. Karen stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. This is a witch hunt. You're all turning on me because of lies and manipulated information. I've been nothing but dedicated to this community. Her voice had risen to a shout. Several people near her moved away. Karen, I said quietly, you did this to yourself. Every document I've shown tonight is authentic. Every fact I've presented is verifiable. You used your position for personal gain, and you got caught. That's not a witch hunt. That's accountability. The board held a formal vote right there, with all the homeowners as witnesses. The motion to remove Karen from the board for cause passed unanimously, with Karen abstaining in a futile attempt to maintain some dignity. She was also stripped of all HOA access, including keys to the community center and the shared storage units, and her access to the HOA email and bank accounts was immediately revoked. But the real devastation came 2 weeks later. I'd continued my investigation and discovered that Karen had been involved in several other questionable decisions during her tenure. She'd approved a landscaping contract with her brother-in-law's company at inflated rates. She'd used HOA funds to pay for a neighborhood watch program that consisted entirely of her driving around in her SUV harassing people about minor violations. She'd even submitted expense reports for HOA business meals that appeared to be personal dinners at upscale restaurants. I compiled all of this into a comprehensive report and submitted it to the district attorney's office along with my formal complaint. I also sent copies to the state HOA regulatory board and filed a civil suit on behalf of the HOA seeking reimbursement of all improperly spent funds. The local newspaper got wind of the story and ran a front-page article titled, HOA president accused of bribery scheme. Karen's name and photo were prominently featured. The DA's office opened a formal investigation. The state regulatory board launched their own inquiry. Premier Estate Services, realizing they were now under scrutiny, immediately released a statement claiming they'd had no knowledge of any impropriety and had simply been in discussions about providing services. They tried to characterize the payment to Karen as a legitimate consulting fee for market research, but no one believed them. Their reputation took a significant hit, and they lost contracts with 3 other HOAs in the area. As for Karen, the civil suit moved forward quickly. My documentation was ironclad. Her attorney advised her to settle, which she did, agreeing to repay nearly $43,000 in improperly spent or misappropriated HOA funds. The criminal investigation was still ongoing, but the DA indicated they were seriously considering charges of bribery, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly fraud. The final blow came at the next general HOA meeting, held to elect a new president and vote on proposed bylaw changes. I drafted new rules that would require full transparency in all HOA financial dealings, mandatory competitive bidding for any contract over $5,000, and term limits for board members. Every single proposal passed with overwhelming support. The homeowners also voted to approve my solar panel installation without any fees, and several neighbors mentioned they were now considering solar panels themselves. Karen attended that meeting. She sat in the back corner, alone, while the community she'd ruled over like a petty dictator voted to systematically dismantle everything she'd built and repair everything she'd broken. When the vote on the new transparency rules was announced as unanimous, I turned to look at her. Our eyes met across the room. In that moment, Karen finally understood the full scope of what had happened. She hadn't just lost her position or her reputation. She'd lost her power, her carefully constructed image, and potentially her freedom if the criminal charges went forward. She'd face years of financial hardship from the settlement. Her name was permanently associated with corruption and abuse of power. And it had all happened because she'd gotten greedy, because she thought she was untouchable, because she'd forgotten that every kingdom, no matter how small, can fall when the foundation is built on lies and self-interest. The shocked, hollow look on her face as she realized she'd destroyed herself was something I'd remember for a very long time. If you enjoyed watching Karen's empire crumble under the weight of her own corruption, please give this video a like and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people facing the consequences of their actions. Justice tastes sweet, doesn't it?